Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Mental Warrior 22 show. I am your host, Alex Bonilla, founder of Mental Warrior 22, author of The War Inside. And tonight, we're having one of those honest conversations. First, let me welcome everybody. Welcome everybody who is here. Thank you for being a part of the show. Please, wherever you're chiming in from, let me know. Let me know where you're coming from, where you are tuning in from. And before we get started, if you can, please, in the comment sections, highlight, send this to your peoples, invite someone who might need to hear this. Welcome, D. Welcome, Trina. Welcome. Waxahachie's representing. Puerto Rico. That's what I'm talking about. So, again, tonight's question is going to be simple, but the answer is usually uncomfortable for some. Welcome. All right, we got California here. Jojo from the Shire. Absolutely. So tonight's conversation is going to be, what are you settling for because you're lonely? What are you settling for because you're lonely? And this isn't not because you're happy, not because you're fulfilled, not because you're loved, but because you're afraid to be alone, right? Maybe it's the relationship. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's a situationship. Maybe it's the job, right? Maybe it's the version of you that you have outgrown. And loneliness has a way of convincing us that something is better than nothing, right? So that attention is love. That consistency isn't necessary. And the red flags aren't really red flags. So tonight, like every other episode, it isn't about judgment. It's about awareness, because once you become aware of what you're settling for, then just maybe you can begin deciding what you truly deserve. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for tuning in. Again, highlight this. Let's share this to our peoples. Let's keep the community growing. So let's talk about the fear of being alone. The fear of being alone. Because when we talk about what we're settling for, we have to talk about why we settle, right? So some of the questions that we should be asking is, actually, before I even go to that, I have a question for everyone who's watching. Who has ever stayed longer than you should have? Who has ever stayed longer than you should have? And I think that most of us have been in some type of relationship where afterwards you're like, I can't believe that it lasted that long. I can't believe I stood there that long. I can't believe I endured all that for that long, right? So how many of you tuning in, watching, or people you know have stood in relationships longer than they should have, right? You ignored the warning signs. You accepted behavior that you knew wasn't healthy, but you continue giving chances knowing damn well that the things wouldn't change. But you stood there, right? And I think that maybe the hardest question is, how many of us stayed because the thought of being alone felt worse than the relationship itself? You know, how many of us have stood in relationships and you're like, you know what? I don't want to start over. Like, yeah, he's a jerk, but at least I already know him. I don't want to start all over. I don't want to learn someone else's favorite color, or I don't want to learn someone else's demons or their issues, their problems. So you rather stick around and endure the lack of effort that the other person is giving you for different reasons, right? Michelle, yes, I try to stay for my kids. I think that kids is probably the number one answer for most people. Most people stick around because they think that it's better, right? No, let's keep the family together because it's better for the kids. When in reality, most of us as kids, I mean, I remember my parents fighting all the time, and that did nothing for me. That did absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, it had the opposite effect. When my parents split, I was I was kind of relieved. So, and kids observe everything, even when you think they're not. They're paying attention to everything. So, Trina, been accepting for 14 years. Jojo, the devil you know, absolutely. Yeah, he snores, but we have earplugs. Absolutely. And again, we all have our different versions, right? Each relationship is our relationships were all different, but it was the same, right? At the end, we all stood longer than we should have for different reasons. And, the truth is that many of us aren't afraid. We're not afraid of the unhealthy relationships, right? The unhealthy relationships we can tolerate. Most of us grew up with, in broken homes. Most of us has been yelled at most of our lives. Those who were in the military, you were yelled at. And a lot of times that toxic relationship almost seems normal. So it's not the unhealthy relationship that we're afraid of. What if the reason why we stay is because we're more afraid of the empty home, the empty beds, the weekends with no one, the holidays alone, the going to dinner alone, the watching everybody else move forward and afraid to start over. Angela, it's not better for the kids. Would your kids rather see you happy apart or miserable and fighting? Absolutely. I agree. I agree. You know, my, I mean, I got divorced and my daughter's happy, loves both her parents, but she is happier with us apart. Um, we both parent great. She's a great mom. I'm a great dad. But together, it wasn't good. And my daughter got to experience it. Misty, someone you'll stay because it's familiar, the devil it's comfortable for the day to day. Yeah, sometimes it is. Amanda, the unhealed version of me felt normal in the chaos. That is the familiar trend, right? Most of us would rather deal with the familiar chaos than the unfamiliar peace. And because we're afraid of that starting over part, right? And perhaps most of all, we are afraid of the silence. I think that is a big thing to take a look at. The silence. Silence forces us to hear conversations we've been avoiding. The silence will make us ask questions we don't want to answer. And some of those questions could be, am I enough? Why do I keep choosing this? Why does this keep happening to me? Why do I need someone else to complete me? These are questions that the silence will ask, and being alone removes the distractions. Being alone removes, like, there is no text, no notifications, no relationship drama sometimes, no one to fix, no one to rescue. There's no one to save. And suddenly you're left sitting with yourself. And for some people, that's the terrifying part. And it's not because you're weak and it's not because you're broken, but because you spent years avoiding pain and finally becomes loud when everything gets quiet. You've been avoiding that pain. So now sitting with it, it's that voice, right? It's something that most of us who've experienced, with PTSD or trauma, we spent time avoiding it. And at the end of the day, when we lay our heads down, it just gets loud. So it is very difficult for some of us to sit in that silence. And because of that, we would rather choose to remain in that chaos. Nikki, welcome. Jojo, some people use silence as a weapon. That too. Angela, I've been divorced for many years until recently, thinking about my kids moving out soon. I'm only now worrying about the quiet that is coming. That is another thing to think about, the silence of, but that goes back to what we talked about last week about that identity, the kids moving out of the house. Like, who are you when nobody needs you? And that was one of the things we talked about. You know, like some of us, because we can't deal with that quiet, some of us need to stay busy. Some of us stay in relationships. Some of us will jump from person to person. Some of us will immediately begin dating after a breakup. How many of us have done that or know someone who has done that? How many of you have had a significant other or spouse that when you got divorced, you took time with that person, immediately jumped into the next relationship? Or you did yourself. Again, not judging, just we all know that person. And it's not because they were healed, not because they were ready, but because the loneliness felt unbearable. So loneliness has a way of making us negotiate with ourselves. Amanda, as someone with CPTSD, I understand this feeling all too well. I get it. I feel it. The voices can get loud, and sometimes it's easier. Sometimes it's easier to hear the complaints and the gripe from someone next to you than to hear it in your own head. To have to kind of tell yourself that, right? To lay down and hear those voices. It's the unfortunate reason, kind of like when people self-harm. Sometimes people self-harm because it is easier to transfer the pain, right? If I cut myself, I know why I'm bleeding. I cut myself. But I can't explain what's going on up here. If someone's telling me it, then it's easier for me to understand, like they're telling me this, than the voices in my own head telling me. Leanne, the voices may get loud, but my YouTube is louder. Hey, whatever works, right? Whatever works. But the loneliness has a way of making us negotiate with ourselves, right? We say things like, at least they're here, maybe they'll change. I don't want to start over. I don't want to be alone. But sometimes loneliness can become a poor decision maker, right? Because when we're starving emotionally, we're going to accept the breadcrumbs that other people give us, right? Just like when you're thirsty, what happens? You start drinking from empty cups. That's not productive. That's not going to help you. And that's where many people find themselves, right? They're not necessarily in love. They're just seeking relief. And what kind of relief are they seeking? It's the insecurity, the release from that, the relief from abandonment wounds, the childhood rejections, the divorce, the betrayal, the trauma, the grief, feeling unwanted. And many of us learn very early that connection equals safety, right? And as a child, being accepted meant survival. It meant surviving. So being included means security. Being abandoned means pain. So as adults, we sometimes tolerate the unhealthy relationships because the fear of losing that connection feels much greater than the pain of staying. And the fear of being left became stronger than the desire to be treated well. Misty replying, I also have that worry as mine are becoming adults. They stay in your life in a different capacity. So it's not always quiet. It's true. Those kids will always keep coming back if you raise them right. But loneliness doesn't just affect dating. People stay in unhealthy friendships, right? How many of us have, like, you don't even know how you remain friends with some people and dealing with the negativity, their toxic behavior, how they, you're watering dead plants. They only reach out to you when they need something. They're constantly like dumping all their trauma and everything onto you, but they don't reach out to check on you, right? It's not a give and take. They're not there for you. It's just free therapy you're providing for them, right? You stay in these unhealthy friendships that drag you down. Or the toxic family dynamics. How many of us often hear, oh, well, you only got one mom, forgive her. It's okay, that's your mom, but that's your mom, or that's your dad. That's like, there's always an excuse you hear where people will justify the shitty behavior of someone. So it's not just romantic relationships. How about the job? How about the job that drains you? Matt, hell yeah, shed that dead weight. Absolutely. A lot of us have been in a job that, you just need the money. So you have to, right? You can't just quit unless you win the Powerball or the Mega Millions, marry a sugar daddy or sugar mama. I don't know. Like we all need to pay bills. So sometimes we stay, but we also stay because we feel that we're not good enough to get another job. We're not good enough for that promotion. We're not good enough for the next level. So we settle because we think that that's where we're at, right? It also affects environments that no longer fit you. Jojo, cord cutting was one of the best things I ever learned to do for myself. Absolutely, right? But a lot of people struggle with leaving because leaving is uncertainty. And like we as humans, as people, we're afraid of uncertainty. So I want you to ask yourself, am I staying because I'm loved? Any of these situations, relationships, jobs, family, environments, I want you to ask yourself, am I staying because I'm loved? Or am I staying because I'm afraid? Am I staying because I'm loved? Or am I staying because I'm afraid? And am I choosing this person or am I choosing not to be alone? If you're in a relationship right now and you're uncertain, these are things you should be asking yourself, right? Am I choosing this person or am I just choosing not to be alone? Nikki, I filed for divorce early this year. It's been complicated and dramatic, but I'll never look back. That's good, Nikki. And listen, you got this community, right? We're always telling you you're never alone. So anytime you need to reach out, you can reach out. That's what we're here for, right? So am I choosing this person or am I choosing not to be alone? Something I want you to ask yourself because there is a big difference. The irony is that there are so many people that are lonely inside their relationships, right? You can sleep next to somebody and still feel alone, right? You can text someone every day and still feel unseen. You can be committed and still feel disconnected, right? We live in an age where we have all this accessibility to everything: social media, phones, text, emails, doesn't matter what it is. And yet we are so disconnected. So disconnected. You can be in a crowded room and still feel so alone. There's a lot of people that are with someone or married to someone and they feel so alone. They feel so disconnected. So, Alicia, hi. Ed, most of the time we stay in a job because we need the money. Most of the time we are not loved or appreciated. I agree. It's the unfortunate thing that sometimes leadership forgets how to lead and they treat you like a number instead of appreciating your value and what you bring and who you are, right? So understand being alone and being lonely are two different things. They're not the same thing, right? Sometimes the loneliest people are sitting next to someone who no longer sees them. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is learn that your own company is not the enemy. There's a difference, right? Because until we become comfortable being alone, loneliness is going to continue negotiating your standards. It will continue to convince you to settle. It will continue to tell you that less is enough. So tonight, I want everybody watching, once again, ask yourself, what have I accepted because I was afraid to be alone? And if I truly believed I deserve more, what would I no longer tolerate? Because loneliness may explain why we settle, but it doesn't have to decide what we deserve. Natasha, a new level of fear is unlocked though. When you've been divorced, doing it alone, and the vulnerability of letting someone new in after the fact. I agree. I agree. And I think that this is where, when you've been alone, and we're not talking about lonely, but I feel like when you've been alone and you start to love you again and you start to recognize what you want, you also understand what you will not tolerate, right? You stay on that top shelf. I've never seen someone go to a bar and ask for the drink on the top shelf and negotiate the price. Well, I only have a few bucks. I've never seen the bartender lower that drink down to give it to them. Nope. You can't afford it. That's on you. You stay on that top shelf. You don't lower your standards for anybody else. Once you know you and what you want and what you don't, then you maintain that top level. So it's that. So when you meet a new person, there is that communication and you enter it with an understanding, right? Um, because the truth is, no one wakes up one day and says, you know what, I want to be in an unhealthy relationship, right? Nobody says, I hope somebody takes me for granted and I spent years unhappy. No, I hope I lose myself. Nobody chooses that pain, but a lot of us choose what feels familiar. And that's when the settling begins. You're used to a certain type of person or certain things. And even though you know it didn't work before, you start to settle for a lot of the similar things, right? Settling doesn't happen all at once. Alicia, I used to feel like I had to belong to someone. Now I belong to Jesus. My peace is worth more than being with someone. And that's good. That's good. Natasha, I want steak and lobster. I had enough spam and eggs. And there you go. There you go. But again, settling doesn't happen all at once, right? It's the slow, gradual, like you ignore one red flag. You make one excuse. You lower one standard. You tolerate one behavior. And over time, before you know it, you begin accepting things that you once promised yourself you would never again. And why? Because the fear is often louder than your self-worth. It's the fear of abandonment. It's the fear of abandonment, right? The fear is louder than your self-worth. So many people don't stay because they're happy. They stay because they're terrified of being left. They're like, maybe you experienced that abandonment as a child. Maybe the parent left. Maybe, experiencing the divorce. Maybe someone you loved walked away unexpectedly. So now every relationship you carries that same fear. What if nobody else chooses me? What if I never find someone again? What if that was my only chance and I messed it up? That fear of abandonment is going to become so powerful that at some point you might start accepting the behavior that you would never have tolerated. And that fear of losing someone becomes greater than the pain of staying. Nikki, my new standard is what my bestie wants from me. That's right. So sometimes we don't fight for the relationship, we fight against being abandoned. And this is what may be the most painful, right? Because most people settle because they truly believe this is all I deserve. This is the best I can do. Nobody else wants me. right? And then there's also the effect of that person manipulating you, telling you you'll never find anybody else like me, right? And that between your self-doubt and what they're telling you, sometimes that becomes your reality, right? You know, for a mom with kids, being in a relationship and that fear of, well, no one's going to want me, I have kids. And that could be because somewhere you started believing that, or that person who left you made you believe that. I have too much baggage. Us veterans, people with PTSD, with trauma, I'm too damaged or I'm too old. And when our self worth is low, our standards often become low as well. And not because we don't know better, but it's because we don't believe we're worthy of better. And people often accept the love they believe they deserve. This is why I keep saying stay on that top shelf. You don't lower your standards. If you believe you're difficult to love, then you're going to tolerate people who love you poorly, right? If you believe that you're unworthy, then you're going to accept those relationships that are just going to reinforce what you believe. And that's why healing your self worth is going to be important, because confidence doesn't just change who you attract, it changes what you tolerate. So, Matt, best thing my mom ever did was divorce my bio dad. Sometimes it's the necessary evil, right? Sometimes it's needed to find yourself again. Sometimes it's needed. So, let's talk about past trauma, right? Past trauma for some people, for some of us, maybe most of us, the chaos feels normal, right? If you grew up around the conflict, the instability, the emotional distance, the unpredictability, healthy relationships are going to feel like it's just going to feel so uncomfortable because your nervous system became accustomed to the drama, the anxiety, the emotional highs and lows, these inconsistencies, the walking on eggshells. You become so accustomed to that life. So when someone comes along who is consistent, who is kind, emotionally available, and stable, it feels unfamiliar. It feels so foreign, and sometimes it feels unsafe. And that's why sometimes we self sabotage, or you're just waiting for something to go terribly wrong, right? So many people don't return to the toxic behaviors or toxic relationships because they enjoy the pain. They return because the chaos feels familiar. And we often seek what we know, even when it hurts us. Even when it hurts us. So, breadcrumbs again. Yes. Alicia, same here. I don't have military service, but I have PTSD from sexual, emotional, narcissistic, and physical abuse. I want a love that feels safe, where my nervous system is at ease. And this is what this is for, Alicia. It doesn't matter whether you are a veteran. Trauma is trauma. My trauma on the battlefield does not trump your trauma elsewhere. Doesn't matter. We are all dealing with something and going through something. So yours deserves the same level of care as mine or someone who served. We all trying to find ways to regulate that nervous system. So you start being suspect of good people because you don't know if it's a mask. Yes. And that's the unfortunate thing, right? That's the thing nowadays. You just don't know, right? You start to question everything. And that could make or break you. The moment you start questioning things, sometimes you might overthink that. And this is where finding your self-worth comes along, right? Because again, if you start to suspect things in certain people, then you need to ask yourself, what is it that you're suspecting, right? If you see a red flag, then listen, it's a red flag. Right? Trust your gut. Or how they say in most places, right? Trust but verify. I feel like the world is rampant with narcissistic tendencies. I try not to use that word much because I think that it often gets thrown around. I don't disagree. I think that there is too much selfish behaviors. There is a lot of selfish behaviors and a lot of me, right? It's no longer us and doing things for us. We live in a society of options. With social media, everyone thinks that they have options. So we're going to take a moment here to pay the bills real quick before I jump back at this. So we'll be back in a moment.
Men of Warrior 22 isn't just apparel, it's a reminder to keep going for life with purpose. Visit MW22 Shop and check out the latest shirts, hats, and gear built for the mindset, not just the look. Stronger together, no one stands alone. If you need coffee that actually hits different, this is it. Fuel your mind, elevate your day. Go to Ariel Resupply Coffee Company, proud sponsor of the Mental Warrior 22 show. Use MW22 for 20% off. Link is in my bio. Empowering Holistic Health is a proud sponsor of the Mental Warrior 22 show and a proud partner of the Mental Warrior 22 Foundation, helping people focus on wellness from the inside out. From health programs and supplements to apparel designed to support your lifestyle, she's building a community around better health and better living. Visit empoweringholistic.com for more. Hey everybody, this is Lex from Men of Warrior 22, and I want to talk to you about the war inside. The war inside was born from real battles, real struggles, and the truth that many of us spend our lives living in survival mode without even realizing it. This book isn't written about trauma. It's about resilience. It's about confronting the lies that we tell ourselves, breaking free from the weight of our past, and finding the strength to reclaim our lives. If you ever felt like you had to carry the world alone, if you've ever smiled while silently falling apart, then I wrote this for you. The War Inside is a reminder that healing is possible, that hope is real, and no one has to fight alone.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. So going back to Alicia, yes, that's why I said tendencies. Everyone says everyone is a narcissist. Yes. Um, there's a lot of people that show those tendencies. A lot of people manipulating in relationships nowadays. I think that is it's the unfortunate thing. But again, a lot of people hide behind the keyboard and certain types of behaviors. So, but let's talk about age. How age may play a role in this. Sometimes we are in. Sometimes we are in a situation where we hear that internal clock, right? We hear that internal clock, and some people might think, I'm too old. I'm too old. Nobody wants someone my age, right? I don't want to build another relationship. I'm too old for this. I am too old for this. And so you stay in the relationship that you're in. No, not the age. Absolutely. I'm in my midlife crisis at 45. I got you beat. But, as we get older, we start to think that. You start to think, like, damn, I've been with this person for X amount of years. Like, at this point, I might as well stay with them. At this point, do I really want to deal with anybody else's crap? I don't. I'm too old. What am I going to do? Go to a bar? Am I going to get on a dating site? Am I going to do this? Like, you play those scenarios in your head, right? And so sometimes you stay in those relationships. And again, it's not because like you're fulfilled, but because you believe that your time is running out. So you might as well stay because you don't want to be alone. So I want you to understand something. Everyone who's listening, I want you to understand that loneliness has no age. Healing has no age. Healthy relationships has no age limit. Doesn't matter. If you can find love at 45, 65, it doesn't matter, right? You're never too old to choose peace either. So, Leanne, for the military time does make a difference too. Like, are they going to get half my retirement? I might as well stay. So that is a big thing. Um, that those are other things to think about, right? To consider. You stay in a relationship because, like, damn, it's just, you often hear guys say it's just cheaper to keep her because if you get divorced, she's gonna take half. But the same applies to females, like you said, Leanne. Like, what if you're the one making all the money? And there are guys who are just shady enough to want to divorce you and take half of your stuff. It's the unfortunate. I've seen guys go and try to seek child support and take alimony from the woman too. So it works both ways. And sometimes it is cheaper to stay and you justify that, right? Kim, you're right. There is no dollar worth your future. Sometimes you gotta know when to just walk away, right? Just burn the ships and walk away, right? Some people settle because they know how difficult it is to rebuild. When you experience that divorce, the separation, the betrayal, a death, a heartbreak, the idea of beginning again is usually exhausting. So you're already going into that not having the energy, not wanting to go through it again, right? So again, you tend to stay or get into situations that doesn't serve you. Linda, sometimes staying is based on the cost of disentangling yourself. Yep, divorce costs a lot. Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember, staying in the wrong place doesn't protect you from the pain. It's going to just extend it. You know, uh, rejection. Rejection's another thing. Sometimes the rejection leaves scars. If you've ever been cheated on, abandoned, felt ghosted, replaced, being told you're not enough. Like many people enter these new relationships carrying those wounds with them. So now you're afraid of getting hurt again. So sometimes you accept less. Instead of like you avoid asking for your needs, you tolerate the poor treatment. So because somewhere inside, they're saying, again, at least this person stayed. The person can stay and still be the person that's triggering you, the person that's hurting you, right? Staying should never be the only qualification for a relationship because they stayed. That means nothing, you know. Some people stay for the same reason, right? Because they don't want to start over either. And it's not because they can't, but because they know they got one over on you. They know you're going to tolerate their bullshit too. So they stay and they just continue to make life difficult sometimes because it's also very cost efficient for them. But here's the truth. Many people nowadays are not choosing relationships. Many people are choosing relief. You're choosing the relief from the loneliness, from the insecurities, from the fears, the silence, the uncertainties, and relief is only going to make you lead. It's only going to lead to poor decisions. So again, tonight, I want everybody who's watching, ask yourself, am I choosing this person or am I choosing not to be alone? Am I staying because I feel loved or because I fear starting over? Am I settling because this relationship is healthy or because loneliness has convinced me that less is enough? Because the answer to those questions might reveal whether you're building a new relationship or simply avoiding the loneliness. And those are two very separate things. Okay? So, Michelle, I'd rather be alone and have peace versus having someone and not being happy. Again, absolutely. There's a difference between alone and being lonely, right? There's a difference. So then there's relationship patterns. Again, And you start asking yourself, why do I end up here? And, it's often the patterns. We date our patterns, we date our wounds, we date our beliefs, and until we become aware of those patterns, we're just going to keep repeating them. Some of us are chasing emotionally unavailable people. The person who gives just enough attention to keep us interested, but they're still sending you the mixed signals, the breadcrumbs, the person who says, I'm not ready. The person who can't communicate. That's the person with one foot in the door, one foot out the door, but doesn't step out of the way to allow that love to find you, you know. But we tell ourselves, if I love them enough, they'll change. If I give them a little more, they'll change. But understand that love can't heal someone who doesn't want to heal. And your love should never require you to abandon yourself. Period. You know, Others become rescuers. You like to find broken people, whether you realize it or not, right? Hurting people, people in crisis, people who need that saving, because helping feels familiar. It like being needed feels vulnerable, feels valuable. So you need that. You seek out people that you can try to fix, right? Like if I fix them, then maybe we'll finally feel worthy, like ourselves. It's kind of like, oh, I feel good. I fixed them, right? But again, relationships aren't projects, right? It's not a school project. You can't carry someone into healing. You can't love someone into becoming the person they refuse to become. And eventually, being a rescuer is going to become exhausting. And again, some of us are the fixers, right? We overgive, we overfunction, we put our needs last, and we believe that our value comes from what we provide. And this is what I talked about last week. We have a habit of that. And sometimes we become so focused on being chosen that we stop asking, do I even want this relationship? Like we spend all our energy trying to be enough, trying to earn love, trying to prove our worth. And in the process, we forget that healthy relationships doesn't require you to constantly audition. And one of the biggest mistakes that we make is confusing the chemistry for anxiety. Butterflies aren't always butterflies. Sometimes they're warning signs, right? Sometimes what we call chemistry is actually that uncertainty, that fear, that inconsistency, that emotional highs and lows that that person is showing you, right? We've been taught that love should feel intense. But sometimes our heart races because our nervous system is recognizing that familiar chaos. So that's why sometimes you hear people say, oh, I just didn't feel the spark. I just didn't feel the spark. What they sometimes mean is, I didn't feel the anxiety I usually mistake for connection. So let's talk about some of the signs that you may be settling. You feel anxious more than you feel peaceful. The communication is inconsistent. You feel you're asking for basic effort, walking on eggshells. Leanne, those are wasps, not butterflies. Absolutely. You overthink every conversation. You make excuses for behavior you know isn't healthy. You accept the breadcrumbs because you're hungry for connection. You celebrate the bare minimum because you've been accustomed to receiving less. So you begin lowering your standards to keep someone around, and eventually you stop recognizing yourself. So here's another question. If your best friend was dating this person or your kid, what advice would you give them? Would you tell them to stay? Would you tell them to keep waiting? Would you tell them to keep sacrificing themselves? Would you tell them they deserve more? Sometimes we give everyone else the best advice that we're unwilling to give ourselves because deep down we know. The question isn't always whether this relationship is healthy. The question is whether we believe we're worthy of a healthy love. So relationships should be two people giving the same amount. I agree. I agree. Only I don't say 50-50 because I feel that's unrealistic. or 100 when people say that. No, I think that some days I'm gonna be 60, you're gonna be 40. Some days I'm gonna be 80 or 20, and vice versa. But that's where that comes in, right? It's the yin yang. We balance each other out. Together we complete each other, and that's that 100%. Because no one's always going to be on top of their game. No, you're going to come home from work and you might have a bad day. But if I have that perspective and I'm feeling good, then maybe I can balance that out, and vice versa. So, so let's talk about what a lot of us struggle with also. Dating while healing, right? Healing does not require perfection. Understand that. None of us arrived here completely healed. None of us have all the answers. We all carry these experiences. We all carry the scars. But healing does require awareness, right? So before entering a relationship, you should ask, am I looking for love or am I looking for validation? Am I looking for love or validation? Am I seeking the connection or am I seeking someone to make me feel worthy? Am I trying to share my life or am I trying to fill a void? Because there's a difference, because the relationship should complement our lives, right? They should not become our identity. Some people date because they can't tolerate being alone. So they date immediately after a breakup. They need that constant attention, that constant texting, that reassurance. The silence feels threatening to them. But another person can't heal the wounds they didn't create. I can't fix those for you. A relationship can support the healing, but it can't replace it. And healthy relationships require things that many of us never learned. The boundaries, the communications, the accountability, the trust, consistency, the honesty, and perhaps, like most importantly, the ability to receive love. And many people know how to give love. Very few know how to receive it, because receiving love is going to require vulnerability, and it requires trusting. It requires believing that you deserve it. And we've spent years surviving. Receiving can feel really uncomfortable. And like I mentioned earlier, healthy people feel boring. You ever notice that when you level up, when you do something good in your life, you ever heard someone like when you finally decide to stop drinking, people label you as boring. Oh, you're not fun anymore. When you set boundaries, oh, you're not the same person. You're boring. When you decide to no longer run the streets, spend money, and do dumb stuff and decide to focus on you, you become boring. You become boring according to other people, but you're not, right? You're not boring. You just no longer tolerate or create the chaos. Some healthy people feel boring, but it's not. Like, you don't disappear, you don't play games, you don't leave people guessing. You communicate, you show up, you remain consistent. And if your nervous system has become accustomed to chaos, peace is going to feel strange. And a lot of people will sabotage healthy relationships because, again, the stability is going to feel unfamiliar. So understand this: the peace is not boring, neither is the consistency or the emotional safety. Sometimes the healthiest relationships you've ever experienced feels uncomfortable because your nervous system is finally learning what safety feels like. You finally find someone that kind of makes you feel that way. You're like, oh my God, like, how dare you communicate effectively with me? Don't allow the loneliness to choose your relationships. Don't allow the fear to choose your standards. Trina, absolutely. The numbers change, but if we complete each other and work together and have the willingness to be there when your partner needs you. Yes, absolutely. So I want you to think about this, and I want you to respond and comment, either now or sometime throughout the night. I want you to comment, what have I settled for? What red flags did you ignore? What lessons did loneliness teach you? Have you ever stayed because you feared being alone? Take a moment and think about that. And if you want to share your stories along the way, again, for other people to read, come back to, then great. I appreciate it. If you don't, then that's fine as well. It's your journey. So you share what you feel like it. Many people watching tonight think they're alone in this struggle, and you're not. Like, this is what this is for. This is why I ask for the comments and to reach out to each other. We're building a community. We're building a community because that's what we believe, right? We're stronger together. So it's time to stop settling. First, learn to enjoy your own company. Take yourself to dinner. Go out to dinner. Take yourself to dinner. Travel, read, walk. Do that on your own. And I know that there were certain points in my life where I was like, no, that's insane. I'm not going to be that idiot sitting down. No, listen, I will sit in a coffee shop by myself and enjoy me time, right? Because when you enjoy your own company, loneliness will lose some of its power. Second, build the life you love. Your happiness can't depend entirely on another person. Build friendships. Pursue your goals. Develop a purpose. Create joy outside of those relationships. Third, identify your standards. Write them down. What are your non-negotiables? What behaviors are unacceptable? What values matter to you? Fourth, enjoy the Fourth, stop explaining away red flags. When someone shows you who they are, believe them, right? Someone shows you who they are, believe them. Don't excuse their red flags. Nope. We do that too often for too many people. I think what they meant was, no, it's exactly what they said and what they did. Believe them. Fifth, remember that loneliness is temporary. You survived difficult seasons before. You're going to survive this one too. And finally, understand that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. You can be alone and be peaceful. You can be married and be lonely. You can be dating and be lonely. You can surround yourself with people and still feel unseen. Peace is always better than pretending. So I want you to understand what you tolerate often teaches people how to treat you. You deserve the respect. You deserve the consistency, the honesty, the effort, the communication, the emotional safety, the mutual investment. The right relationship should not require you to abandon yourself. You should never have to shrink. As I mentioned before, listen, be the top shelf. Be the top shelf. Don't dim your light for someone else to shine. Nope. There's plenty of room for all of us to shine. And we're not talking about just on a romantic level. No, even with your friends. Someone should never have to bring you down in order for them to shine. Absolutely not. There's no reason why we all can't win. Why we all can't clap for each other. Why we all can't lift each other up. Right? Matt, take the time to find you're happy. Absolutely. Alicia, I think the world has gotten so swept away with instant gratification that nobody's willing to invest in building a solid foundation. I don't send nudes. I don't date. I'm celibate. I want something real that isn't tied to absolutely maintain your standards. If that's what you want, listen, I've said this time and time again, even if people think you're weird, listen, you're going to find your tribe. Be who you are, and the right person or the right people will gravitate towards you. And don't settle. Trina, super glad for this podcast. And I do travel alone. Thank you. Leanne, there's room for everyone at the top. Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't see any reason why I can't root for someone, even if you're doing the same thing I'm doing. No, listen, I hope you win. How can I help you? Let's collaborate. Let's work together. Let's celebrate each other. Let's motivate each other. Listen, you guys here, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it isn't for you guys. We're all in this together. We're all here to support each other in one way or another. And again, I always say that sometimes you get the biggest support from complete strangers. So remember the goal. The goal is not to simply find someone, right? The goal is finding someone while keeping yourself. You shouldn't have to lose yourself. And if anybody, I don't care what it is, I don't care if it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, family, you should never feel like you're losing yourself. And you should never have to stick around. And I understand that there are situations that it's just easier said than done, right? You have to get yourself in that financial situation. You have to get yourself right. You have to take steps. You have to know, but then do it. Take that first step. Start working towards a better you. It doesn't have to happen overnight. And we're not talking about fixing your life overnight. We're talking about just taking those small steps, to make sure that you get to that point, right? You get to that end goal. Keep your eye on the prize. If this relationship is not working and you can't get out of it because you don't have the money, then okay, then that's your goal. How do I get from here to there? Because the worst thing is when you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't recognize your own reflection. No one should ever have to experience that. Oh, Lori, great self questions, getting to know yourself and why are you making the decisions you do. Know your peace, embrace it. Thank you. So many of us settle because we carry these invisible wounds, the wounds that say, I'm not enough. Nobody stays. I have to earn love. I'm too damaged. I don't deserve more. This is the reason why, why we discuss what we are talking about here. This doesn't just apply to romantic relationships. This is for other aspects in your life. This is a reason why, I created the Mental Warrior 22 Foundation. It's for reasons like this. We're all going through stuff. Let's bring each other together. Let's heal together, regardless of what it is, regardless of where you come from, what your political affiliation, what your religious preference is. It doesn't matter. We're all going through something. Listen, understand that the guy in first class is still experiencing the same turbulence as the guy in 34B. We're all going through the same turbulence, right? Doesn't matter whether he paid $1,000 for that seat and you paid $40. Doesn't matter. We're all experiencing the same turbulence. Doesn't make him or her better than you. Trust me, they all have something they're going through. So, reach out to someone, reach out to a friend, reach out to us. I have the Mental Warrior 22. I do a one-on-one speak that if anyone needs a little time, they want extra time to talk about something, listen, reach out. There's other people here in the comment sections. You don't want to talk to me, reach out to one of them. But you don't have to face everything alone. I want you to reach out to each other. So it's time that we start to recognize and remember who the hell we are, right? Because healing doesn't happen by accident. Growth isn't going to happen by accident. And you shouldn't have to walk through any of this alone. I want you to remember, everyone sees the warrior. Everyone sees all that in you. But very few are going to understand the war inside. So I'd like to take this time to thank each and every one of you. And if we've never spoken before, regardless of what capacity, don't forget who you are. Don't let anyone make you believe that you are anything less. So I thank you guys for being a part of this show. I thank you for being a part of this community. And I look forward to seeing you guys next Wednesday night. Have a good night.